Sean Carlson, Blackjack 98 Enterprises. Hello once again, everybody. What we have behind us is a Stihl FS56RC. Customer bought this to me early this morning. The time right now is approximately 8:30 in the morning on Thursday, August 2nd. And I'm just waking up, so we're not drinking heavily tonight. We're just having a Timmy's French Vanilla. I'm going to flip this camera around and we're going to inspect this here. Okay, so we got a dual head line feed on our weed eater, and I got to clean this up. The guy that brought this to me said that he couldn't get this running. He replaced the spark plug, he worked on the carburetor, he did everything it is that he possibly could with his knowledge. Hold on a second. And so therefore he found me, he got a hold of me, and then he brought it, and then I said I can get it to working. So everyone, what we're gonna do is we're gonna test for spark, and we're gonna check the compression on this. And the way that we do that is we use a spark plug checker and a compression checker. Okay, we'll see what the reading is. If we do not have a spark, there's a possibility that there's a bad magneto or a bad spark plug or a bad connection. We'll test everything. If there's no compression, there could be a scored cylinder, there could be something wrong with the cylinder or the piston, a loose piston or something like that. We're going to inspect the piston and cylinder itself. So a complete teardown and rebuild is what we will be doing on this. Holy crap. So first thing I'm going to do is take off the housing. This comes off, this comes off, this comes off. Right down, ladies and gentlemen, to the cylinder and the piston. So let's get to it. Okay, so I got the carburetor cover off and the rear cover off too. I was not able to get the spark plug out because this boot was in the way in order for me to test the spark and check the compression. This boot was in the way. I couldn't even get a tool in there to freaking pull it out. Not a big deal. This is what we're looking at. So when I press the primer bulb, fuel is going in and out like it's normally supposed to. What that also tells me is there is fuel in the tank, so I'm going to have to be very careful when I remove the carburetor and disconnect those lines because there's going to be a fuel spillage and leakage. This here is the choke. The choke is not attached to the air filter like some are. This is you got to push it in and pull it this way. So this is choke cold, this is choke warm, and you just push it in and put up and down. So what that means is there's a butterfly valve, most likely, that is attached to the carburetor, and the throttle works nicely. See that? So there's a throttle valve, a throttle butterfly valve. Okay, there's a throttle butterfly valve on this side of the carburetor, and the choke is on this side of the carburetor. There's two valves, so we're gonna have to take this out. And the guy said that he rebuilt it before and he adjusted the carbs, so there's probably a malfunction with the assembly of the carburetor. So we're gonna take it completely apart and inspect that too. And right now, what we're going to do is we're going to attack these two and pull this out. By taking these two out, we'll most likely loosen up the carburetor from the housing. And this part here, as you can see, there's a screw right there that attaches this to the actual housing, the cases. So, yeah, let's, when you're tearing things apart, inspect the other parts too, and don't lose the screws. So by looking at this, I was pulling this, and this is a fully functioning rewind. There's nothing wrong with it other than that crap there, this oily, greasy shit. The cover for the air filter and the air filter itself look pretty new and intact. The guy probably replaced this too, and it's new, so not a big deal there. There is no visible cracks or nothing. Okay. Oh, and you see those symbols on there. The top symbol is what the regular symbol is for a cold start choke. This is a warm start choke, okay? Just those two right there. And this is your idle screw. This is your low jet, high jet, and your idle. Okay? So once we've got those, then we can work on the rest of it. Okay, so when you're taking apart the carburetor, be aware of these parts here, that you don't put holes in them or scratch them or rip them or tear them apart. Also be aware of the orientation if there is any holes. I was actually thinking maybe the guy put it apart and took it apart and blocked a hole. Sometimes there's a hole in the bottom or the top, and they're usually blocked by the incorrectly placed gaskets. So that is not the case here. Let me put that right there. Now when we're taking out the carburetor, we can disconnect the throttle and the fuel lines, because we can't exactly take it out just like that. So what we gotta do is we gotta pour out the gas from here and disconnect that line, and then pinch off the fuel lines so they don't leak. Okay. Very important. And the way that I usually pinch those off is with the actual clips, like paper clips, those triangular paper clips. Okay, so once we have the carburetor out, now we have this. So let's point everything out. This here, the tube, is the return. When you hit the primer bulb, the fuel goes through this back into the fuel tank. When you hit the primer bulb and sucking the fuel into the carburetor, this is the one that is attached to the fuel filter. Okay, so fuel comes in here, fuel goes back into the tank here. From the tank to the carburetor, from the carburetor to the tank. Now, this tube here is a vent tube for the gas tank. Because of the fact that there is pressure that is in the gas tank, it expands, it contracts, the weather, the heat of the engine, the motion of the fuel. This needs to create relief of the pressure that is in the gas tank. Okay? So now we're going to take off this cover. This here. Oh, what do you know? Okay, so there's a wire that's attached right there. That's probably for the on-off switch, then the magneto. And it looks like there's 3 screws here. And look at that, there is a gasket. As I was talking about earlier, make sure that these gasket holes line up. And this one looks like it does line up. And to be very careful. Do not rip this, otherwise you might have to buy another. As I was saying, those holes are very important when it comes to this cover right here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the carburetor. Anytime that you're dealing with a carburetor, put it into a container. You can get these containers at the dollar store, because carburetors leak if you're having problems with them leaking, okay? So there's no holes on this side like we've found out, but there is holes on this side. So that hole right there needs to correspond to the hole on the bottom, and the hole in that gasket needs to match this hole. Those are very important. I had a customer previously where those holes were not matching up, and that was what the problem was. Okay, so we're going to take this completely apart. We're going to disassemble it, but we're going to do that later. And we're going to see how exactly the framing, the diaphragms are put together, because they could be upside down or backwards. So we're going to put that in the container and put it aside. And then the rest of this is going to come apart. Okay, now to get the engine and parts out, you need to flip it upside down and take out the screws. There is this many. Now, there's 2 types of screws here. There's the fine threads and the coarse threads. Do not get those two confused up, and make sure you remember where exactly they came out of. And make a mental note of it, or take a picture, okay? Because fine threads have to do with the actual body and the cases, and the loose threads, or the coarse threads, are most likely the ones holding two plastic parts together. Like the outside housing, and this is attached to the engine most of the time, okay? Be very mindful of which screw goes where and how it comes out, because they look the same, but they're not. Okay, so once those screws are out, this is what we're looking at. Okay, so pay attention to this entire configuration when you're disassembling it, because there's springs, as you can see right there. They will fly out. There's cables that run along certain channels that are supposed to run along those channels, okay? Do not force anything. Look at this wiring right here. Make sure that there's no breaks or tears in that wiring. Pay attention to the electrical, okay? This is what the cover looks like that I just took off. It is one piece. So we're gonna look at this to make sure that there is no deformities, no missing pieces, or any of the sort. This will be cleaned, by the way. So yeah, just by looking at it, it's just dirty. Dirty, oily, greasy. Okay? So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take off the shaft from the engine. And the way that we're gonna do that is very carefully. Disassembling this part here. I can't do everything with two hands, so I'm gonna have to put this down and work on it. Okay, so the shaft, which was in there, can just slide right out. You can just pull it out with your finger, and the shaft just comes not comfortably out. You just slide it out of that handle, and it'll just look like this, okay? So this can be taken out just by pulling it out. It's easy. Alright, so we just put this aside, and we'll get to this entire thing later. Now, what we're going to do is disconnect this wire, and then this engine can just simply lift out. Just like this. See how that wire... Oh, okay, you know what? Let me... There, turn it. Okay, wire's disconnected. Now we're going to pull it out. Carefully. There we go, there we go. Woo! Flying, flying, flying. There we go, right there. That is the heart of the beast. Okay, so we're gonna analyze it. We're gonna look at it. Okay. I want to see what's inside the cylinder. So the way that we do that is we take this off, and the muffler, and a spark plug. We can look at the cylinder through this way. We can look at the cylinder through this way, and in through there. That way, okay? So we can see the top of it. The sides, I'm thinking we'll be able to see more of it. If it's a clean piston or not, we'll find out. And so by looking at everything else, there is no problems with it spinning. Sometimes somebody puts a magneto in the wrong way and it hits and it won't turn. And that is not the case here. That's where it most likely would be hitting. It's right there. So we're not having any problems with the magneto or the flywheel. And this here looks fine. It's spinning freely. Okay. So in order to get at the piston, those 4 screws come out. Okay. And they disconnect everything. As you can see, that is the bottom of that screw right there. So this comes out, this comes out, this comes out, and explodes. Okay, but before we do that, we're going to take off this, this, and this, just so we can look at the cylinder and the piston, how the condition of them before we take everything here apart. Okay? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I got a tripod, so I can use 2 hands here. This here's the carburetor side. This here's the muffler side. Okay, so let's look at the carburetor side. We got 3 holes here that we're dealing with. And I'm going to try to see if you guys can look at the piston. So right there at the piston, when I'm twisting the piston up, it looks to me like it's a nice walls. The walls of the piston are pretty good, and I can just barely see the rings. I don't know if you can see them. They're just light browning around the rings, but the piston itself on the bottom of the skirt is light gray. There's no lines, there's no indication of resistance for scratching. Okay, now we're going to look at the muffler side. Here we got a better view of this side, and as you can tell, that's right there, that's the top. And now you can see inside the walls that there's pristine condition. If to see that reflection there, that's the inside. So there is nothing wrong with the interior of the cylinder. And when we're pushing up, there's no lines, there's no visible lines on the piston there. There's light browning, but that's normal. So if I was to say anything about the condition of the piston and the cylinder, I would say it's in pristine condition. I can't really look at the top of the cylinder because of the angle of the hole, so that's bunk. But you know what? Everything here seems to be functioning fine. There's no resistance in any of the parts that are moving around. When I shake it, I don't hear anything else. There's no rattling loose components. And if there was, they would be at the bottom of right here. You would hear them. If you were to shake it, you would hear it coming from here. That would mean that there's some type of debris that got sucked into the piston from the carburetor side. And so therefore, I am willing to say that this is a good engine. So now let's look at the this part here. This part here connects to the carburetor, so we got to make sure that all the holes that are going to the motor, the engine, the piston, are clear. There's no hair, grease, or anything. We got to take this gasket off very carefully and make sure all the holes are flushed out. Okay, there could be a blockage in there. I have seen garbage and stuff get into this area here, and that would be the reason why it's not working. But if you do take this off, take it off very carefully because it could be glued onto there. So take it off carefully, flush it out, carburetor fluid or air or whatever. Just get it nice and clean. Now let's look at the muffler. The previous person who had this apart put some gunk around this to prevent the muffler from shaking to death, loosening the bolts, because that does happen even on a chainsaw. So what we're going to do is we're just going to clean this out to make sure that the airway is clear and that the air that is going from here into here comes out of here correctly. There's probably a screen in there that we will clean out and make sure that the airflow through this is efficient, okay? And so that will be that. Next, what we're going to do is look at the carburetor. We're going to take this completely apart, and I'm just going to get set up here, and we're going to do that right now. Okay, so now comes the part for the carburetor. There's fuel in there, so when you take this apart, you really got to get rid of that fuel, and there's a way that you do that. These, I just noticed, are hex head adjusters, so I think I have that tool. I will have to check. This here controls the throttle, the idle of the engine, and as suspected, 2 butterfly valves. These are butterfly valves. This here's the choke, and this here's the throttle. Okay. Okay, so this carburetor is not an original carburetor, because if it was, you would see the name right there, and not only that, but there would be embedded or stamped numbers to identify it in the Stihl database. There is nothing like that. So this here is a cheap Chinese knockoff. Those heads right there, the idle adjust, are hexagonal. Those hex heads require this tool right here, which I have, which fits. I just happen to have that. So when we take this apart, we're going to get rid of that fuel. And the way that we do that is we're going to find out the way that we take out the fuel is we're going to press the button and we're going to find out where that fuel is coming out of. Is it going to come out of this one or is it going to come out of the bottom one? I already know from experience it's going to come from the top one, and you're going to watch it come from the top one. So here we go. Pressing the primer bulb.
Dad, cool down. I want to try too down. I try too. Oh,
here we go. So this is how exactly you clean out your gas tank when you're storing it. You got to press the primer bulb, empty everything out, and keep pressing this until there's no more liquid left into there. Okay? And then now we can go ahead and tear this apart. So we're going to put it right there and get a screwdriver, this one here, and we're going to lay everything all out. Okay, so this is the layout of the carburetor I've been taken apart. Now, I did find some crud in this section right there, if you can look at it. See, just a little bit of crud in there? Okay, so that means that there's something in the fuel tank which caused it to form like that. These are the two idle jet screws, and they are not the same. You really need to pay attention to these to make sure you don't get these mixed up, because you will. If you do that, you will have improper carburetor adjustments. And they look like they're the same, but they're not. So let me put them right next to each other. Just like that. And you can see that one is longer than the other. This is the high jet. The one on top that I'm pointing at is the high jet. This one here is the lower jet, okay? Some carburetors have those that are the same. This is not that case, which means you really need to pay attention to which one is which. Otherwise, your carburetor is not going to adjust correctly. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flush out all the holes with fluid and air. We're going to wipe everything down, and we're going to test this for, well, we don't need to test it because we already did. We're just going to clean it out, wash it out, put the stuff back together, and then we're going to test the carburetor for drinking. And yeah. Okay, so I did some tweaking, some adjusting, and I'm just going to let everybody know right now. There is a gasket on this part between these two, and there's a gasket right there. Because they were dry, when I replaced them, you have to create an airtight seal, because air can get into there and create that lack of pressure that's in the sew. Air can get into this dry gasket here and the dry gasket here. So what I did was I went and took some grease, put it on both sides of the gasket, so that way it created an airtight seal. That airtight seal is what is going to give this carburetor a better suction power. So when we press the primer bulb, you get a steady stream. And this is what it should look like when you're pressing it. Okay? So it's crucial to have a steady stream in this one going into your carburetor. If there's bubbles going in, then that means there's an air leak somewhere in the tube or the air filter. And if there is bubbles coming out, that means there is an air leak somewhere inside this carburetor. Under normal circumstances, when the carburetor is fully functioning, with this primer bulb should be at least half full. Okay, certain weed whackers and certain small engines have this completely full, and that's just because of the suction power of the carburetor, how it's created by the manufacturer. Okay, so now we know that this carburetor is good and it's functioning exactly like it's supposed to, which means we cleaned it out correctly. Now what we can do is put this back into the weed whacker. But before we do that, we're gonna look at other things there with the shaft. So Now that this is all done, this can get put back together, and we're going to look at the shaft now, and the head and the cutter line. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the head, we're going to grease all the components inside here, and we're going to clean out the shaft, and this part here can just simply come right out. Come right out completely. Just like that. And voila, we get a shaft. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some grease onto this. We're going to flush out the shaft out there, and then work on the head. But yeah. So I'm working on the head right now. This that's the spool, and this is the cover. It's kind of, you can tell it's like well used. This is going to be all cleaned out. If any of you are wondering when you're putting your line on, which direction should I put it on? Well, there's arrows on there that tell you which direction to wind the line. There's an arrow right there. You see that? So that means you put it in, and then you pull the line going this way. Now, there's a reason for that, and that has to do with your cutter. You see this here? This is your line cutter. When it's spinning, it limits the line for the length. So when it's spinning, it's going to hit this and chop the tip off. So, as a rule of thumb, if your line, okay, let me look at this. Let's see here. So yeah, the line is spinning this way. When you're using it, when you're spooling it, putting it onto that, you wind it the opposite direction. So you put the line on the spool in the opposite direction than the head is spinning. And that is how it properly works for when you put the spool onto the head correctly. Okay? Now, I'm going to take this head off, and how we do that is right there. This part here covers that entire arrangement. That you could not have even seen that until you take that off, and then it exposes that screw. Once we get that screw off, then we can have access to this head. Okay, so we got the head all nice and cleaned up, and everything's put back on there correctly, and the line here is greased. I'm gonna put that some more into there. Some people actually like to see the fact that it's getting greased, and that is what I will do. But this entire center shaft will be greased. Yay! And it just goes in there, bloop, just like that. Okay, we did a continuity check on the wires. So we went from the black one here to the black one over there. The black wire shows continuity, which means there's no breaks. We went from here to the blue wire to over there with the blue wire. And the blue wire itself, there is no breaks. And we tested the switch out by putting two leads, those two leads onto that point, and hitting the button. When we hit the button, it's one of those rebound buttons, and it shows that the switch works. So even though I can't do that with one hand, I can confirm that the electrical is good. And we're not going to bother anything with the fuel tank. I did check for brakes in the fuel line. There's none. I did check for brakes into here. There's none. There's no brakes into here. So this here is clean and flushed out. This here is clean and flushed out, and the inside of the fuel tank looks real clean. So there is no issues at all with the fuel tank. Everything can now go back together. Okay, everybody, this thing runs completely brand spanking new now. Everything turns. This is all greased, oiled, and cleaned inside. I didn't clean out here because I didn't have enough time. The guy's actually on his way here. But a lot of the inside of that spool is spotless. And the engine is perfect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get the guy to videotape me starting it for him, so that way you can see it working and idling like it's supposed to. But yes, everything is pristine, everything is perfect. The primer bulb is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and because I had it running, there's nothing wrong with the spark plug, there's nothing wrong with the compression, there's nothing wrong with the rewind, there's nothing wrong with the gas tank or the fuel flow. Okay, so we have a fully functional unit. This thing runs like it's on steroids now. And the video that you're going to see next after this will be me starting it for the customer. And yeah, I'm happy. And then I'm going to start it for you.
Okay.
So, this is choke. Prime bulb hitting it. Up button works. And there you go, sir.